Hi, it's Kate Swag and I'm with Four Star and we are at Go
What's going on, guys? I'm testing out the Canon RF 14 to 35 f4 lens here on the Red Komodo. Now, the reason that I am looking at this lens is mainly to see if it can replace a pre-existing lens that I have used for quite some time now. That lens being the Sigma 18 to 35 f1.8 art lens. This is a classic Super 35 lens from Sigma. Came out a number of years ago, but it is a workhorse lens. It's a very popular lens, and the image it produces is nice and sharp and clean, but does have a bit of that Sigma character to it. Very professional look. It's just a really great all-around lens. But I did notice that over time, there were some issues that kept cropping up with it. And I thought, let me try out some native RF lenses, since I am primarily shooting or was using this lens with the Red Komodo. Now, as I said, it's an EF mount lens. The Sigma 18 to 35 does work quite well overall, but when it comes to the autofocus, because it is an EF mount lens, when you are adapting EF mount lenses to different mirrorless mounts, the autofocus performance is never going to be good as the native lenses. In this case, RF mount lenses. I thought I would give a native RF mount lens that's kind of in a similar zoom range to the Sigma 18 to 35. I'd give it a shot. Some major differences between these lenses. Besides the lens mount, the 14 to 35 is a full frame lens, whereas the Sigma is a Super 35 crop sensor lens. On the Komodo, that crop factor is about 1.3 times full frame. The 18 to 35 becomes closer to like a 24, 25 to about a 45 to 50 millimeter lens. That's a pretty good range, but I wanted some better autofocus performance because I found that the autofocus was, on one hand, kind of loud, and also just not that reliable in more fast-paced environments, and even in some cases a more controlled studio environment where I am primarily using the Komodo. So with the native RF lens, you're definitely going to get better autofocus performance. I can bring this object up close to the lens, take it away, and I mean, the autofocus is super snappy even on the Komodo, which doesn't have the best autofocus by any means. Just gonna have the continuous autofocus running, and I don't move around too much from the central spot. It's gonna keep me nice and locked in. I'm not really seeing any, I'm looking at my monitor here, I'm not really seeing any issues, and the transition from closer objects to further away objects, it's just really snappy and really sharp. I'll test out the face tracking capabilities, which you have to enable in the Red Control app. But if I move my face here, I'm also just looking over at my monitor. Yeah, it's pretty snappy. It is staying really right on me, even when I move my face all over the frame. I have noticed though, if I turn my head, if I turn all the way to the side there, it does tend to lose me, but I wouldn't really blame this on the lens. I mean, this issue happens with the Sigma lens and most autofocus RF lenses on the Komodo just because it does not have the most advanced autofocus system, at least, you know, not compared to Canon's or Sony's. It's got pretty decent face tracking considering that it's a RED camera. However, for, you know, subjects whose faces are directly or at somewhat of an angle to the lens, it's gonna stay nice and locked on them. And I'd say reliably more so than the Sigma. Now the big trade-off is that the Canon lens is f4 while the Sigma lens is f1.8. So it's definitely gonna perform much better in low light. However, I did notice that for a lot of my more sort of controlled studio shoots, YouTube videos like this, and you know, in many cases, interview videos, corporate event videos and whatnot, I wasn't shooting or didn't really feel the need to shoot faster than f4 in many cases. Unless it's a really dark environment, which I would not recommend using this lens for. You are gonna need a faster lens for darker environments. But as long as there's a decent amount of light, f4 on either a full frame sensor or the Komodo sensor, which is a little bit larger than Super 35. I mean, that is a lot of light and you're still gonna have a pretty shallow depth of field there. I find that f4 is kind of a, you know, a good, happy balance between keeping your subject sort of nicely separated from the background, but also having enough in focus, not having too thin you know, of a sliver of depth of field, so your in-focus objects are really solidly in focus as opposed to, you know, just like a part of the face. For events and environments that are darker, or maybe the subjects are moving around a little bit more quickly or the lighting is a little bit more erratic, then, yeah, I'm probably not going to use this lens. But in this kind of environment where I'm not moving around too much, or for interviews and most corporate events that have better lighting, they take place outside during the day, or you've got a little more control over the lighting, then I think you're gonna be in really good shape with this lens, despite the f4 aperture, and even on the Komodo, as long as there's not too many people in frame or the action isn't too fast, I think the autofocus is gonna perform pretty well. I would say that, you know, the face tracking autofocus, only use that if you've got just one or two subjects in the frame, like you're doing an interview, for example. If you are in a more crowded environment, like a conference or a wedding or something like that, and you do want to use this camera with the autofocus, I would recommend either sticking to the single or continuous autofocus modes. The face tracking is just not reliable enough if there's more than two people in the frame. Gotta say, you know, I am kind of sad to give up the Sigma 18-35. This lens has been very good to me. I love the image that it produces. It is a super versatile lens, but I've just decided that using EF autofocus lenses, when I do need to use autofocus, is just not reliable enough. It's just not gonna quite cut it. And that's also the case on other cameras other than the Komodo or RF mount. I've used this lens adapted to X mount, to L mount, to E mount, pretty much, you know, most every other mirrorless mount, and the issues are generally the same. So I am moving over to native glass, at least when it comes to autofocus. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the image coming out of the Canon RF 14-35 f4 lens. If you've got the Sigma 18-35, how does it compare? Would you stick with the Sigma, or have you also moved over to all native mirrorless glass? Hit that like and subscribe button. I really appreciate it, guys. It helps the channel grow. I'll see you in the next video.